Good morning, everyone. Those who have joined us for the first time, let me say you are very welcome. And to ones who have been joining more often, let me say welcome back. Today, I'll try doing my best in the meantime, and may God help me. And last week, we had a very timely and relevant teaching given to us by Pastor Wally, and it was on trusting God with our money. He reminded us how important it is to entrust our money to God. Today, I'm going to talk about another valuable resource which also belongs to God, although very often we forget that it is so. Time. And especially time when we feel it. And when do we feel it best? It is when we wait. When time flies, as famous saying goes, we do not really feel it. But when we are waiting, we feel every minute and every second. We spend a lot of our time waiting in line, waiting for news, waiting for a response, waiting for the next season of life. God is at work in our waiting. We might not see any changes in these times of waiting, especially through times of difficulty and through times of personal growth. But there is a plan and purpose in all of it to encourage those who may be waiting, whether through a long, drawn-out process in their personal life, or to encourage ourselves when we most need it, when we are waiting, if we feel that we've been praying and we're not receiving a clear answer, we don't feel that our prayers have been heard and answered. It's important then to remember that God calls us and shows us in the Holy Bible actually many times when people of God were waiting. So I invite you to look closer to some examples in the Holy Bible where waiting turned out to be worth it. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. We read it in the second letter of Peter, chapter 3, verses 8 to 9. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. Such a big contrast, we would say. Yes, a day like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. 1,000 years like one day. So difficult to grasp God's words. And at least 7 stories in the Bible are great examples to prove that. A story of Abraham. Abraham was waiting for a promise to be fulfilled. Then we have a story of Joseph. He was waiting in prison for purpose. Then we have a story of Moses, Caleb, and Joshua. They were waiting in the wilderness in the hope of God's promise. Then very famous story of Job when he was waiting through suffering. A story of Daniel waiting through breakthrough in prayer. A story of David waiting to be king at the appointed time. And even Jesus waiting to begin his ministry. The Lord tells us in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 1. The book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 1. For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heavens. For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heavens. The book of Ecclesiastes is considered to be one of the books of wisdom, alongside with the book of Proverbs and a book of Job. But today, I'm going to focus on a story of Daniel. It comes straight after Babylon's first attack on Jerusalem, when they have plundered the city and its temple and taken away some of the Israelites from the royal family and from nobility into exile. Among them were the 4 men from the royal family of King David, Daniel and his 3 friends, taken away by the Babylonians into exile with some other Israelites. But Daniel's persistence in fasting and prayer, is an important example of faith and trust in God. The book of Daniel has 12 chapters, and chapters 1 to 6 contain stories about Daniel and his 3 friends, how they lived in Babylon, which challenges they faced, and the remaining chapters, 17 to 12, contain the visions of Daniel about the future. At the beginning of the story, we read that Daniel and his 3 friends are very wise and very capable and are recruited to serve in the royal palace of Babylon. But they soon become pressured to give up their identity by living and eating like Babylonians. So Daniel and his 3 friends, taken into exile with some other Israelites, they get this training actually for 3 years, and they are recruited to serve in the royal palace of Babylon. They are chosen to serve the king, but they experience this pressure to give up their identity, and this was like the first test. They were pressured to eat the way Babylonians were supposed to eat. They refuse and choose faithfulness to Lord's commands. And actually, this first test passes rather lightly and easily. However, in chapter 3 of the book of Daniel, we read this famous story of Daniel's 3 friends who are pressured to bow in front of a statue, and the statue representing the king and his imperial power. So, an idol, basically. They refuse to worship the statue and are persecuted. They are thrown into fiery furnace. But what we read next, God delivers them from death, and they even end up being elevated by the king of Babylon. The king of Babylon then acknowledges that their God is the true one. So we actually see this blessing in disguise. So they experience this turmoil, this danger. God saves them. And this is not even the end of the story. Yes. The Babylonian king actually acknowledges that their God is the true God. Then all the kings who ruled in Babylon entrusted Daniel to many tasks and depended on him for carrying out many tasks. They trusted Daniel. But it's in chapter 6 where we read that Daniel himself is persecuted because he refuses to pray and worship the king of Babylon as God, and it puts him in danger. Over the years, Daniel earned a very good name among the people of Babylon. He was also a very devout believer of God and prayed actually 3 times a day without fail. In the meantime, the other senior counselors and ministers of the king, they grew jealous of him as they had to follow Daniel's orders, and also they became afraid that the king of Babylon would remove them from the service of the court. And so those seniors who grew jealous and also afraid that the king would remove them, they were observing Daniel very closely. And they noticed that he was praying 3 times a day. So they were plotting, they were discussing how would they get rid of Daniel. They wanted to get rid of him, and they were thinking which way to do it. And when they remembered that he was praying 3 times a day, they decided that they would try very hard to push through a law that people in Babylon for 30 days are to pray and praise only the king of Babylon. So at that time, King Darius. And it was not allowed to praise or worship anyone else or pray to God except to the king of Babylon. Daniel is faithful to God and he carries on praying. So he's sentenced to death and thrown into a lion's den. In fact, the king of Babylon, Darius at that time, he was not keen on doing so, but because this law was very quickly pushed, he was not aware that Daniel would be affected by it. But because he signed that law, he then sentenced Daniel to death because he was praying still 3 times a day, and especially the ones who were observing him, they saw that, they reported to the king that he was praying. So Daniel is thrown into lion's den. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. So when I was actually reading that story in depth, and I just thought, okay, this tomb, this stone really reminded me of Jesus when he was laid in the tomb, and as well the ones who were actually mourning this and crying for them to come and to see that there was no stone and the tomb was empty, was a little bit something like we're reading now later on in the book of Daniel, when king when he sentenced Daniel to death, he could not sleep at that time. He was also fasting, and actually at the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den and called Daniel in an anguished voice. So he still had some hope that somehow Daniel will be saved. So he did not want Daniel to be killed. And when Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me." So when King heard these words, he was very happy to hear that. And these words are so powerful. We witness here a miracle in these words. May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me. Alleluia. I pray that in your life, if you are facing such a situation, that you feel as if you are in a lion's den, surrounded by the lions, that God would send an angel and the lions would not be able to hurt you. Daniel became famous for serving the kings of Babylon very well, very wisely, but also for interpreting visions and dreams. So in Daniel chapter 9, we read that Daniel understood from the scriptures that the desolation of Jerusalem would last 70 years. And so Daniel is earnestly praying to God. And in this prayer, even repenting on behalf of the people of Israel. Daniel chapter 9, verse 4. I prayed to the Lord my God and confessed, Lord, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments, we have sinned and done wrong. We have been wicked and have rebelled. We have turned away from your commands and laws. We have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, and our ancestors, and to all the people of the land. Lord, you are righteous, but this day we are covered with shame. The people of Judah and Jerusalem and all Israel, both near and far, and all the countries where you have scattered us because of our unfaithfulness to you. We and our kings, our princes, and our ancestors are covered with shame, Lord, because we have sinned against you. The Lord our God is merciful and forgiven, even though we have rebelled against him. We have not obeyed the Lord our God or kept the laws he gave us through his servants and prophets. All Israel has transgressed your law and turned away, refusing to obey you. So further on in Daniel 10, he again receives the revelation, but before receiving an answer and understanding the meaning of it, Daniel fasted and prayed for 3 weeks, 21 days. So Daniel, in this case, he does not receive an instant answer. So he used to receive previously answers very quickly, and he even experienced this huge miracle when he was in the lion's den. So this time, that was the waiting moment. He had to practice patience. He had to practice humility and perseverance. So finally, in Daniel chapter 10, verse 12, we read, an angel of the Lord came to him and said, do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. From the first day. An angel even explains why Daniel had to wait for 21 days. As we know, some time ago, Daniel used to be granted wisdom and understanding straight away, but not this time. Angel tells Daniel, the prince of Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Daniel's prayers reached God from the very first day. That is very important. This is an encouragement to continue and to persist in our conversations with the Lord, for He hears the prayers of the righteous, as we can read about His promise in Psalm 34. Daniel's story also reminds us not to take for granted all the gifts and help and guidance Lord is giving us. Even though Daniel used to receive answers and explanations very quickly, and even experienced this great miracle when he was saved from the lion's den, he also had to experience waiting and practice patience. Daniel was humble enough not to get frustrated quickly and not to take all the gifts and miracles he has experienced and witnessed for granted. So he was praying and fasting for 3 weeks. When it is hard to pray in the waiting, we are wise to remember famous words. Prayer does not fit us for the greater work. Prayer is the greater work. I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits. I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. Psalm 130. I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits. I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. More than watchmen wait for the morning. If you do not receive answers to your prayers straight away, remember, God's answer is yes, not now, but later, or I have something better for you. Remember, Abraham was waiting for a promise to be fulfilled. Joseph, he was waiting in prison for purpose. Moses, Caleb, and Joshua, they were waiting in the wilderness in the hope of God's promise. Job, he was waiting for suffering. Daniel, waiting for breakthrough in prayer. David, waiting to be king at the appointed time. And even Jesus, waiting to begin his ministry. I would like to wish you a very blessed Sunday. And as Jesus reminded his disciples in Luke chapter 18, that they should always pray and never give up.